And, I was never really into politics way back when, but in the last 10 years, I got very interested in it. I got kids, I got grandkids. I'm worried about the country, and I love my country. Forget what I did before. I love my country, right? And I said, okay. And I'm looking at the government. I'm saying, you know what? This government is acting more Machiavellian-like. It reminds me of what we did on the street.
Right.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Sit Down with Michael Franzese. Hope everybody is doing well. All is great on this end. Praise God for that. Today I have a very special guest. I had the pleasure of meeting him a couple of weeks ago. We did a speaking event together. It was a Christian event, a men's event, and I had the pleasure of meeting him. Now I got to say this. I've been following him for about 25 years. And when I got to see him, I was excited about it because we happen to think alike about a lot of different things. And so today we're in his studio, and I want to introduce hopefully my very new and dear friend and somebody that I admire very much, Larry Elder.
Michael, nice to see you.
Pleasure.
By the way, we met some years ago at some function because I remember being very impressed with you and your background. The fact that you don't remember it shows you what kind of impression that I made.
Really?
How are you?
I'm good. When was that? How long ago was that?
I'd say about 10 years ago.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry for that.
Hey, no problem.
But listen, what I said, I have been listening to you at least 20 years. Yeah. I know you started in radio in the 90s.
Right. I started in 1994. I've been doing it almost 30 years, not quite 30 years. And I just now ended my radio career with Salem Communications. I was with them for 6 years. Before that, I was with KABC for 20 years. And I'm now doing videos full-time for Epic Times. And I still write a syndicated column. I've been doing that since April of 1998, once a week. And I give a lot of speeches. I have a political action committee set up called Elder for America. As you know, I ran for governor, which we'll get into. And I'm raising money to campaign for school choice, to campaign against critical race theory, a campaign to get rid of these soft on crime DAs, and a campaign to strengthen families. Because the number one problem in America, in my opinion, Michael, is a large number of kids who enter the world without a father married to the mother. 40% of all kids born today in America enter the world without a father married to the mother. And Obama said a kid raised without a father is 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. 70% of black kids enter the world without a father married to the mother, up from 25% back in 1965. Almost 50% of Hispanic kids enter the world without a father married to the mother. So my political action committee is going to pursue policies to strengthen families.
And the way I can verify that is that I do a lot of, I speak to a lot of young kids, a lot of gangbangers.
I know you do.
And Larry, they all have the same story. Every one of them. Single family home, mom, she's trying to do her best, no dad to give them guidance, and that's where they end up.
Right.
And I did 8 years in prison with a lot of them that came into the system at 21, 22 years old. They all had the same story, exactly what you just said.
There's a religious writer, Michael, named James Robison, Robison. He wrote a book called My Father's Face. And he talks about a prison chaplain at one of these federal penitentiaries who wanted to improve the morale. So he went to one of these greeting card companies, got 500 Mother's Day cards, and took them back to the prison for free, the card for free. And the prisoners filled them out, sent them to mom. And morale improved. So he said, I'll do the same thing for Father's Day. Go to the same greeting card company, gets 500 cards, Father's Day cards. You know where I'm going with the story.
Yeah.
Goes back there. Not a single inmate wanted to fill one out and send it to his father. Not one. And turns out virtually everybody behind bars either had no relationship with their dad or a bad relationship with their father. And that's where this stuff starts.
Do people really understand what that means, Larry? I mean, that's devastating.
I don't think they do, not even on our side, meaning the conservative side, because as I said, 25% of black kids were born outside of wedlock in 1965. There's a booklet called The Negro Family, A Case for National Action, written by a guy named Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who later on became a Democrat senator to New York. So he's a liberal. He got hammered for writing the book, and now that number is 70%. Now, how did he go from 25% to 70% today when it certainly less racism today than it was in 1965? And the answer is Lyndon Johnson launched that so-called war on poverty, provided all this welfare, provided there was no man in the house. And if you look at the amount of spending that we've done for welfare, it's over $22 trillion in the last 50, 60 years.
22 trillion.
22 trillion. T is in Tyrannosaurus. And you look at the lines of the percentage of black kids born outside of wedlock, and they parallel each other. What we've done, in my opinion, is we've incentivized women to marry the government, and we've incentivized men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility. And I'm not even hearing Republicans talk about this. They talk about the outputs, crime, dropouts, not being able to compete in the market. They don't talk about the input. And the input is, unless you have somebody in the house, Michael, who will make sure you've gone to bed on time, make sure you've done your homework, make sure you've been fed and clothed, you are in deep, deep voodoo. And that's what we have right now. There are think tanks on the left like the Brookings Institution. Am I talking too much?
No, keep it coming.
Think tanks on the right like the American Enterprise Institute. And they disagree about all sorts of things, but they agree on the few steps it takes to escape poverty. And number one, finish high school. Number two, don't have a kid till you get married. Number three, get a job, keep a job, don't quit that job till you get another job. And number four, avoid the criminal justice system. And avoiding the criminal justice system is a matter of choices. You're not destined to become a criminal. You're not destined to become a gangbanger. You know that. You do those things, you will not be poor. But it starts with the family.
You know, it's interesting you say that. And for those of you that don't know, I'm sure you know Larry, but you're an author, you're a radio host, you're an attorney.
Sex symbol.
Okay, I was going to leave that out, but I'm glad you brought it up. You ran for governor.
Right.
You were a TV personality. I mean, I don't know if there's anything you haven't done.
New York Times bestseller, as long as we're bragging on me. I have a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
That's
on
right.
the corner of Hollywood and Vine. Get out of here.
How did you get that?
You tell me.
Who nominated you for that? How do you get that?
A lot of my listeners have nominated me over the years, and
Really?
I get this little notice telling me you've been nominated. Nothing happened. So I wasn't even thinking about it. And so one day, I get some notification telling me that I was going to be awarded a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
Wow.
April 27, 2015. The only reason I know that is that's my birthday.
Oh.
Because I had a window when I could choose when to get the thing done, and so I chose my birthday. And, you know, Michael, I was never a big movie guy. My older brother Kirk, my late older brother Kirk, my best friend, he died on September the 13th, Friday the 13th, 2 years ago. Had a heart attack, 3 years ago now. Love movies. And he would drag me down to Hollywood, because we're born and raised in L.A., and he knew everybody down there. Fatty Arbuckle, he could tell you his background. Mary Pickford could tell you her. I don't know how he even knew this stuff.
That's way back.
Tell me about
Yes.
it. And it never occurred to me, Michael, that someday I would be down there. And that's where I am. Not just there. I'm there at arguably the most famous intersection in the history of the world, Hollywood and Vine.
Hollywood and Vine, yeah.
The southeast corner, right across the street from the Pandages. I mean, pinch me.
So there isn't many things that you haven't done, even having a star on a Hollywood Walk.
Another one, again, while we're bragging on the great Eldersky, I gave a speech at the Ronald Reagan Library. My mom and my dad were still alive at the time. My first book had come out. It's called The 10 Things You Can't Say in America. I always wanted to be an author. In fact, I consider myself to be a writer more than anything else. And when I was a kid, I would look at the LA Times bestseller list, the New York Times bestseller list, and I never imagined I would write a bestseller. I just wanted to be a published writer. And maybe someday I could figure out how I could start a career as a writer. Just pay the bills. So my first book comes out. I was 42 years old when it came out. New York Times bestseller. So I'm at the Ronald Reagan Library, and I'm talking about my book and my background. I introduced my mother and my father. And I asked them to stand up. They got a standing ovation at the Ronald Reagan Library. And when my speech was over, people were lining up, asking my dad, an 8th grade dropout, to sign the book. And I'm sitting up here at the podium looking at this. Only in America can something like that happen.
Right.
My dad never knew his father. My last name, Elder, is not the name of my dad's biological father, which I didn't know until I was 25 years old, because my dad and I didn't get along. I thought he was hard and cruel and mean and nasty.
He was a Marine, wasn't he?
Yeah, Marine, tough guy. And, he would yell at us, and we would do what I thought were trivial kinds of things. I didn't realize the reason he was like that is because he never got any sleep. He worked 2 full-time jobs cleaning toilets, cooked for a family to make additional money, and went to night school 2 or 3 nights a week to get his GED. The man never slept. 15 minutes here, half hour here, hour here. That's why he was so cranky all the time. I didn't realize that until I sat down with him for a conversation I thought would last for 5 or 10 minutes. We talked for 8 hours. And during that time, he told me about his life. And again, I knew nothing about his life. I didn't like him. I didn't give a damn what his background was. And the first thing he said, well, Larry, First of all, I sat down for 20 minutes and I told him what an SOB I thought he was. The spankings he gave me, the whippings he gave me, the time he smacked me around in front of my cousin Elaine with the belt. And I told him everything that bothered me, simmering all these years. I'm 25 years old. And after I talked for 20 minutes, you guys see how I can go. My dad looks up, Michael, and he goes, "Is that it? You didn't speak to me for 10 years because of that?" And for the first time, I saw my dad cry. I did not think my father was capable of crying. And he said, "Let me tell you about my father." And he said, "You know your last name Elder?" I said, "Yes." He said, that's not my father's name." I said, "What? Who's Elder?" He's some guy who's in my life the longest. And by the longest, he said 4 years. His mother didn't work, illiterate, had a series of boyfriends, each one more irresponsible than the other one. And my dad never met his biological father, has no idea who he is. And so for 8 hours, my dad walked me through his life. And he got bigger and bigger and bigger, and I got smaller and smaller and smaller. And my dad started a cafe near downtown LA when he was 42 years old, ran it until his 80s, ended up buying a little property next to it.
Ran it until he was in his 80s?
Yeah, until he was in his 80s. Bought the little house next door, bought the property where the restaurant was, and of course our own home we have in South Central. So when my dad retired, he basically on paper was a millionaire. I mean, get out of here. Only in America can something like that happen. It's about choices. And if anybody had a right to be angry at the world, angry at the man, about systemic racism, yada blah, et cetera, it's my dad. My dad was a lifelong Republican, Michael, and my dad had disdain for Democrats.
And your mom was a Democrat?
My mom was a Democrat. He didn't have disdain for that Democrat, but he had disdain for the Democratic Party in general. Because my mom, to me, it was emotional because she voted for Reagan, she voted for George W. Bush, yet she wouldn't change her registration. And my dad used to say, Democrats want to give you something for nothing, and when you try and get something for nothing, you almost always end up getting nothing for something.
And that was even back then?
That was back then.
Even though the Democratic Party back then was so much different than it is today.
But my dad did not like this welfare stuff. Not that people who are poor don't need help, but he felt this automatic government, no questions asked, here's your check, would encourage bad behavior, and it's exactly what it did.
100%.
He didn't have to go to Harvard or Yale to figure that out.
Right.
You know?
But most people today, it seems, Larry, enjoy taking that check. Whatever, I don't know if they've been indoctrinated,
Right.
They think that the government owes them something.
How did you get to be so conservative?
You know, this is the amazing thing. You and I come from two completely different worlds, practically, two lifestyles. You know, I mean, I grew up with my dad, who was the underboss of the Colombo family.
Wow.
And I grew up under that influence, and then, of course, I spent over 20 years myself in that life. But from the first time I heard you, what impressed me was, number one, you were very bold. Very bold. You just put it right out there. And I'm saying, you know what? I agree with a lot of things this guy is saying. I got to tell you this, too. I was a Democrat. And the reason all mob people were Democrats, because the Democrats were easy to corrupt. We had all Democratic politicians around us in New York, and they were all corrupted. Well, I don't want to say all, but the ones we corrupted were all Democrats, right? And I'm in prison, I'm in the hole, and I'm listening to Rush Limbaugh, and I'm saying, I agree with a lot of things this guy is saying. I said, maybe I'm really a Republican. I just fell into that Democratic, feeling. And then I heard you, shortly after that, and I said, you guys convinced me to be a Republican. I really mean that. And we have two different lifestyles. My father was a very strong figure in my family, obviously, even though he was in and out of jail. He tried to raise me the right way. He didn't ever want me to take a handout. Got to work for everything you got.
He didn't want you to go into the field.
Initially, no. He wanted me to go to school. He said, you got to work, you got to be educated in this country, it's important, wanted me to be a doctor. I was on that road until he got in trouble, and then things changed. I got close with Joe Colombo, and eventually I got into the life really to help my father. It wasn't that I wanted to be a gangster. Didn't want it at all.
Right.
If you would have said to me years ago, what did you want to do in your life? I said, I want to play center field for the New York Yankees. I was a Mickey Mantle fan. But it's really impressive to me that we come from two different lifestyles, but we did have a mother and father in the home, and yet we think so alike. And I'm wondering, is that something that's just innate in us, or what do you think?
I think when your eyes are open and common sense hits you, you come here. That's what happens. That's what I think. I have a story kind of that reflects the difference of the two parties. I lived in Cleveland, and I had a girlfriend who came to Cleveland and stayed at a hotel downtown. And for whatever reason, the Democrats had a convention, and they came in for a whole week. And then shortly thereafter, Republicans had a convention. They stayed in for a whole week. She was in the hotel for about a month. And she said that the wait staff, the taxi drivers, all talked about the generous tips they received from the Republicans. Mm-hmm. They didn't get squat from the Democrats. And she said, when she got up in the morning during the Democrat convention, bottles everywhere, beer bottles everywhere, wine bottles everywhere. There was noise through the walls. Republicans were there. It was quiet. It was respectful. Nobody put any stuff in the halls. What does that tell you?
Yeah, it says it all right there.
By the way, when you were growing up, you had Mickey Mantle in center field. Mm-hmm. You had Willie Mays in center field mm-hmm. for the Giants, and you had Duke Snider in center field for the Brooklyn Dodgers.
How could you beat that?
How could you?
You can't. That was an era that was. I don't think you'll ever see that again.
And Mickey Mantle switch hitting center fielder. If he hadn't blown out his knee.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, he played in so much pain. I mean, if you read the Mickey Mantle story, he was brilliant. But how about Willie Mays?
How about Willie Mays?
Over the back, over the head.
Right, and he probably lost about 60 to 80 home runs when they moved out to Candlestick Park because of the wind. I have another baseball story. I always wanted to be a writer, as I said. I consider myself to be a writer first, and I kind of thought about maybe being a poet until, of course, I realized you can't make any money being a writer, let alone being a poet. But the first thing I wrote was a poem, and it got published. It's almost like being an alcoholic or a gambler. If you play the horses and the first horse that you play wins, you're in trouble. Mm-hmm. So the first poem I wrote, got published in this little thing in the 6th or 7th grade. And I pick it up and I see my name in print and my little poem there. And I was a writer the rest of my life. And the poem was about Sandy Koufax. It was my favorite pitcher, my favorite player. I loved Willie Davis and Tommy Davis and Maury Wills and all those guys, but Sandy Koufax, class, the perfect game he did. He looked good, he sounded good, he said the right things. He was my sports role model. So Michael, fast forward 30 years later, I meet Sandy Koufax at a black tie affair for the Dodgers. They're owned by a guy named Frank McCourt, whose wife was a big contributor to Hebrew University. So they were doing a thing for Hebrew University in Israel. So I'm sitting in the nosebleed seats, but I'm with a publicist named Warren Cowan, and he started the publicist business. If you Google him, it'll blow up. He's the one that basically invented the idea that you should have a publicist and get your name out there. So he knows everybody. And I said, Warren, do you know Sandy Koufax? He goes, yeah, I know him. I said, is there any way you could maybe go down there and see if I can't say something to him? He goes, let me see what I can do. He goes away, comes back, follow me. We go down there. It's like the parting of the Red Sea for Warren. People are getting out of the way. Sandy's sitting there. We walk up. Sandy stands up there, got a tux on. He's fit. He looks great. I said, Sandy Koufax, you were my hero growing up. And I used to think about dabbling in poetry. And the first thing I wrote about you. Can I give you the first stanza? He goes, go ahead. I said, Koufax is on the mound. The game has just begun. He gets a sign from the catcher, and swish, strike one. He puts his hand on my shoulder, leans forward, and says, don't quit your day job. So I wrote a column about this, meeting Sandy Koufax. And I had the Dodgers send it to him. And he sent a picture of him pitching with a little thing on it, inscription on it, and it's downstairs in my gym right now. So when I do my treadmill, I look at Sandy every day.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Great pitcher. Left too early, I think, left the game. But
31 years old.
Yeah.
Nowadays, they would arrest a manager for working them that hard.
Yeah.
These are guys that prided themselves on going the full 9, and sometimes 10, 11, 12 innings.
I was going to say, 10, 11, 12 innings.
You get a pitcher to pitch 200 innings now, and that's good. These guys pitch 300, 350 innings. It's ridiculous what they did to these people. And they pitched every 4 days.
Yeah.
Now it's every 5 days.
And what happened there? I mean, why are they so fragile today? Well, today years ago they were workhorses.
Yeah, and now they have this Tommy John surgery too, and some of them come back even better. Yeah. I think they're throwing harder than they used to throw. There's more money now, and so there's more competition, I guess.
Yeah. Well, Yankees right now on their roster they have 16 pitchers. It's half the team.
Right. Speaking of Biden, you remember when he bragged about the congressional baseball game and the home runs he hit? And it turns out he didn't hit them. And one time he said, I came here and we played, and there's no evidence he played at all. What's with this guy? What is with this guy? The lies.
He's delusional.
The big lies and the little lies.
You know what? For 47 years in Congress, nobody really paid attention to that. But now that he's president, people are really it's too late. It's scary.
Right.
People are really starting to say, the guy's delusional. He really is. There's something. I don't want to get started on that because, Larry, I'm writing a book. I want to see if you agree with this. It's called A Mafia Democracy. I'll tell you the story. After I wrote my business book, I'll Make an Offer You Can't Refuse, about 6 years ago, I owed my publisher another book. So they said, Mike, we want you to do a political book. Think about it. So I thought about it. And, you know, I was never really into politics way back when, but in the last 10 years, I got very interested in it. I got kids, you know, I got grandkids. I'm worried about the country, and I love my country. Forget what I did before. I love my country, right? And I said, okay. And I'm looking at the government. I'm saying, you know what? This government is acting more Machiavellian-like. It reminds me of what we did on the street.
Right.
You know, so I start to write this book. And Machiavelli's theory, I don't know if you know this about it. Are you into Machiavelli?
I read The Prince. Oh, yes.
Oh, you read The Prince.
Of course,
Okay.
yeah.
So what he says, when he's advising his prince how to maintain control of his kingdom, what does he tell him? He said, look, you could lie, you could steal, you can cheat, you can do anything you need to do to maintain control of the kingdom. However, to the public, you must always appear to be upright and having integrity and honesty, right?
Right.
And I'm saying so many people in government are acting like that now. So I start to write this book. I write 5 chapters. And I go to my wife and I said, you know what? Nobody's mad at me right now. I got friends in the government, law enforcement, everything is cool. Why am I going to write this book? They may retaliate against me in some way. I go back to my publisher. I give him the advance back. And I said, I'm not writing the book. Cut to a year ago. I'm so disgusted with the condition of our government and what I'm seeing. It's been worse now than it was 5 years ago. I said, I got to write the book. So I wrote the book. And I'm seeing this in so many people. It's the system now. And unfortunately, I hate to say it, it's more on the progressive Democratic side than it is on the Republican.
Right.
You know, and I'm trying to go right down the line with that. I'm saying it's the system that needs fixing. But what do you feel about that?
You know, Michael, I'm almost a bad person to ask because I'm a small L libertarian. I never belonged to the Libertarian Party, but libertarians believe in Article 1, Section 8. You read the Constitution. The government, according to the Founding Fathers' vision, is supposed to have a handful, federal government, a handful of obligations, duties, and powers. Most notably, to field an army, military, coin money, set up the rules for bankruptcy, set up the rules for immigration, and a handful of other things. That's it. In 1900, at all 3 levels, government took less than 10% from the American people. Right now, it takes about 32%. And if you put a value on mandates, as if you're running a business, the government rolls in and says, in order to fight climate change, you need to do this, that, and the other, and they require you to buy something you don't think you need to buy. You put a value on that, government takes almost half from the American people. Republicans have gone right along with it. When Obamacare passed, which is another giant leap of expanding federal government and taxing citizens, for about a year or 2 or 3, the Republicans talked about repealing Obamacare, repealing Obamacare, repealing Obamacare. Justice John Roberts had an opportunity to overturn it and didn't. 5-4, it was ruled to be legal, and the Republicans essentially have stopped talking about repealing Obamacare. Even Trump, when he ran in 2016, said, we're going to repeal Obamacare, quote, and replace it with something better, close quote. What does that even mean? You replace it with free market.
Right.
You know, healthcare is a commodity, like a flat screen TV or an egg. More competition, the cheaper the price, the greater the accessibility, and the better the quality, like anything else. And I haven't heard Mitch McConnell, Kevin McCarthy at all talk about repealing Obamacare in the last couple of years. Have you?
No.
What happens is they realize that people like the social program, it becomes part of the fabric, and they stop talking about it. And so government is way too big, way too intrusive, taxes way too much, and as a result, we get this little bitty GDP growth every year, 2%, 3%, and Donald Trump got it above 3%, and he bragged about that. There was a time where we used to get 5%, 6% growth. So people's wealth doubled every 10, 12 years. That now would be utopia, because government takes so much, and by definition spends the money less efficiently. One of my heroes is Milton Friedman, the economist, and I had a chance to meet him. He even did a little blurb for one of my books. He said there are 4 ways of spending money. The most efficient way is your own money on yourself, because you spend it exactly the way you want to. Second is your own money on somebody you care about, as when you're buying a gift for your wife or for your daughter. Third is when somebody else is spending their money on you, as when you have an expense account. You can't go crazy, otherwise you get fired. The least efficient way is when you're spending somebody else's money on somebody else. And that's what these bureaucrats are doing. They're taking somebody else's money, spending it on somebody else. And as a result, you have all these inefficiencies. Even for charity, I used to volunteer to United Way for one summer once. And you give $1 to United Way, and 85 cents of that dollar gets down to the intended beneficiary. Government, from your pocket to the federal government to the intended beneficiary, about 70 cents is lost in transfer costs. because people are working on salary, they're not volunteering the way you volunteer for United Way. So even for charity, it's less efficient. If government were smaller and got out of the way, we'd be more prosperous, we'd be happier, there'd be more money for charity. The more money you have, the more generous you are. And so I'm a bad person to ask. I believe that our, meaning Republicans' campaign strategy should be to campaign for an amendment to change the Constitution to limit spending to a fixed percentage of the GDP. I think 10%, with exceptions for inflation, for war, and for natural disaster. And I haven't heard anybody say that. So I'm frustrated with both parties. I vote for the Republican Party because it's the party that does the least damage, and they'll be stronger on the border, stronger on national security. They'll tax a little less, they'll regulate a little less, but the Democrats don't even see a problem, and Republicans want to take a pocket knife to a problem that I think requires a chainsaw. So I'm frustrated every time I get up in the morning and prepare my little video. I'm frustrated with how big government is, how much it takes, and Democrats want to grow it even more and take even more.
Yeah, and people don't realize that when you give the government an inch, they never give that inch back, and they always take a yard, always.
I'll give you an example. Here in California, I remember years ago, they wanted there to be a voluntary family and medical leave program. We're not going to make it mandatory. We're not going to tax taxpayers to do it. And then little by little, it became mandatory, and now they're taxing taxpayers to set up family medical leave. However you feel about it, it ought not be mandatory, and certainly other taxpayers shouldn't be paying for it. Corporations are setting up family medical leave on their own. So can we just leave it alone? And minimum wage, it's always up. You never hear anybody say, okay, $15 and that's it. As soon as the $15, they're going to want 20. And what it's done is it's made it unaffordable to hire people with low skills, a large percentage of whom are black and brown people, the kinds of people on the left claim that they care about. So it's just outrageous to me. The whole thing is outrageous.
Do you think it's fixable, Larry? Or you think it's out of control? I mean, I don't see government decreasing in size at all.
Unfortunately, I don't. When I was running, somebody dug up some column I wrote. I've written a column since April of 1998, so there's 1,200 columns that I've written, 27,000 of radio hours. So you know they're pulling through all that stuff, trying to find something against me. And I don't know how long ago it was, I wrote a column that said the minimum wage ideally should be zero. Think about it. You and I have agreed on a price for your labor. Some third party feels that you didn't make a good bargain, and he comes in and says you should pay this guy more money. What business is it of theirs? So the whole thing is offensive to me. So I wrote that, and I'm interviewed by a journalist, and she's on me about, you think the ideal minimum wage should be zero? You think people should work for free? I said, I didn't say that. If your employer suddenly said, come on in for nothing, would you come in? Of course you wouldn't.
All right.
Let the market set the price. I said, all right, who's your favorite economist? And she went, I said, you can't think of an economist?
No.
She said, well, the one that taught my economics course in college. I said, okay, what is his or her name?
Yeah.
I said, you can't think of a single economist? I said, you know who Adam Smith is? He's the father of modern economics. Wrote a book in 1776 called Modern Economics. And she never heard of him. Anybody that's taken an economics course has to know who Adam Smith is. And I said, do you know who Paul Krugman is? Paul Krugman is probably the most famous economist only because he has a column in the New York Times. He also is a Nobel laureate, but basically people know him because he writes a column in the New York Times. He's left wing. And she said no. I said, Milton Friedman? She said no. By the way, Adam Smith's book is called The Wealth of Nations. I don't want anybody to bust me. They're going to put a comment, Larry's wrong about it. It's called The Wealth of Nations. And I said, Paul Krugman, even though he's left-wing, once wrote negatively about the minimum wage. The New York Times, in an editorial in 1987, said in the headline, ideal minimum wage 0.00. And Milton Friedman, of course, is a free market economist who's also written negatively about the minimum wage. If you've taken a course in economics, in your first 5 minutes, you will learn that the minimum wage is a bad idea. And you can't even think of an economist, and here you are talking to me, and you write about business and economics? That's scary. So, you asked me if things are going to turn around. One of my good friends is Tom Sowell, the brilliant economist, the man that David Mamet once said is America's greatest living philosopher, written over 40 books. And we're having dinner, and I said, Tom, probably the most studied aspect of economics is the minimum wage. And the consensus is that it does damage. How come you can't win that argument? You can't win that argument, what argument can we win? And he said, Larry, most people never heard the argument. Everybody's in their silos.
True.
CNN. They're not doing any features on how many economists think the minimum wage is a bad idea. MSNBC, New York Times, LA Times, none of them are talking about this. And so if you're a regular liberal, and most liberals get liberal news, just as most conservatives get conservative news, you're not even going to know about this.
Yeah.
So they got to wake up.
Well,
It's up to us to bring the information.
They won't do it because they sell it as, Republicans don't want you to earn money. They want to take it out of your pocket. They don't realize how they're hurting small
Republicans
businesses.
are greedy. They're greedy. They only care about the rich. They only care about,
And how did they ever sell that? When you look at history, it's the Democrats have been a wealthy party all the time. How did
How
did they sell it?
The average Democrat household is wealthier than the average Republican household. I get my haircut, my long shorn haircut at a beauty shop and a barber shop, Michael. So one day, this is about 10 years ago, I am getting my haircut, and next to me in the chair is a woman who's bitching and moaning and whining. I call it BMW, bitching and moaning and whining about how rich people don't pay any taxes, and that they're greedy. And finally, I couldn't take it anymore. She clearly didn't know who I was, otherwise she wouldn't have said it. Or maybe she did and didn't give a damn.
Right.
And I said, I hear your conversation about how greedy conservatives are. I said, tell me, who do you think gives more money to charity? Conservatives or liberals? She said, liberals.
Really?
I said, actually, it's been studied. There's a book called Who Really Cares by a guy named Arthur C. Brooks, who wasn't even a conservative when he wrote the book. He was a public policy professor at Syracuse. And he looked around, he wanted to do a paper, make a name for himself, and he found out nobody had ever done an academic study about who gives more money, charity, liberals or conservatives. So he did it. He was shocked. It wasn't even close. Mm-hmm. And then I told her that, and she said, well, that's because conservatives have more money. I said, actually, the average conservative household is less wealthy than the average liberal household. And then she changed the subject. Mm-hmm. She was white, just for optics. Black woman walks in. I said, excuse me, this lady and I are having a discussion about who's more generous with their money, with their time, liberals or conservatives. Who do you think? She said, liberals. I said, actually, it's been studied. I told her the same thing. And she said, oh, well, that's because conservatives have more money. The same thing this woman said. And I corrected her, and she changed the subject. They don't even know. Mm-hmm. I'm at a party. A buddy of mine is having his 60th birthday party. This is years ago. Vietnam vet. Everybody there, I thought the way I thought, the way you think. And this woman next to me is going off on how rich people don't pay any taxes. I thought she was joking at first, and I realized she wasn't joking. I said, you know what? I'm part of the so-called rich. I have my 1040 in the car. You want to see it? She goes, oh, no, that's wrong. I said, the top 1% in America at the time made about $350,000 or more. How much do you think that top 1% pays in terms of percentage of federal income taxes, by percentage? That top 1% pays what percentage of all the federal income taxes? She said, 1%, 2%. I said, you think the top 1% pays 1 or 2% of federal income taxes? And she said, yes. It's 40%, Michael. Yeah. 40%, yeah, while making 15 to 20% of the nation's income. So if anything, the top 1% are overtaxed.
Right.
And she had no idea. That's how deluded these people are.
They had no idea and no answer for that, obviously.
And therefore, when a politician runs and says the rich don't pay enough in taxes, let's raise taxes, why wouldn't you go along with that? Because you have no idea what they're already paying.
I know. And yet all the wealthy Democrats are the ones that are bitching and moaning about
they are.
It. And they're...
What is your explanation for that? Why would somebody who's already wealthy, and especially those who've made it on their own, they didn't inherit it, and most wealthy people didn't inherit it. They busted their butt, became wealthy. Why is he supposed so many wealthy people are Democrats and they vote to have their own taxes raised?
Explain it to me, Larry.
I don't know. That wasn't rhetorical. I want to know what you think.
I don't know. Mm-hmm. To me, it's like people are always campaigning. They're always trying to get the vote. And so they're making people think, that, we're underprivileged and the wealthy should pay their fair share. It's just a mindset that they instill in people because it doesn't make any sense.
I think
it sounds good.
I think part of it is guilt over you. They've made it, you haven't made it. And part of it is a failure to realize what they did. And you busted your butt for 30 years. Yeah. You woke up, wow, now you're a millionaire. It didn't happen overnight. It's the same formula for everybody else. I don't get it.
I don't know. Why are they demonizing the rich now? And I try to tell people, it's the rich that put people to work. It's the rich that drive the economy.
It's the rich that are providing the endowment for all these colleges that produce all these professors that demonize the rich. It's hysterical.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't explain it. My opinion, I don't like to say it because I'm a very optimistic guy. I always believe we can overcome everything. Mm-hmm. I think we're in real trouble in this country. I really do. I don't see how it's going to reverse itself.
We're at an inflection point, and I suppose every generation feels that way.
Yeah.
But I mentioned Thomas Sowell earlier. We've had a number of dinners together, and he's very, very pessimistic. He thinks that our military getting weaker and weaker. I mean, we've got these military officers who want to purge all the white supremacists from our military and putting all this wokeness in it. We have academia that's full of wokeness, big tech that shut down Donald Trump's that article in the New York Post that talked about Hunter Biden and the laptop that they implicated Joe Biden. Yeah. They got shut down, and of course the media has always been left wing and. Hollywood, media, academia, big tech, they all conspire to help elect Democrats to grow the government, soft on national security, soft on the borders, and in the borders they are importing what they hope will be future Democrat voters. That's the only rationale for it. Also, some of the larger corporations love the cheap labor. But bottom line is the Democrats are importing what they think will be new Democrat voters. There's a guy...
And we agree on that. That's the total reason for opening up the borders.
And they don't even lie about it. There's a guy named Eliseo Medina. I urge your viewers to go online and look at it. 2009, he gave a speech. He's the senior vice president of the SEIU union, the Service Employees International Union. This is after Obama got elected. And he said, if we can legalize 11 million undocumented workers, they always say 11 million, it's probably closer to 20, 25 million, according to a study by some professors from Yale. And they always use the word undocumented because illegal sounds bad, even though there's no term for undocumented in our judicial code, our legal code. The term for somebody in the country illegally is illegal. It's an illegal alien. It's not racist. It's not gender. It's not race specific or ethnic specific. It's what you are. You are an illegal alien or a resident alien, but you're an alien, illegal alien. He said if we can legalize 11 million undocumented workers, and 2 out of 3 are going to vote for us, we're going to have a, quote, governing progressive coalition for the long haul, close quote. It wasn't like he did it in a dark room with cigarettes and people wearing clothes and smoking cigars. No, put out there. That's what they want. They want to, because they haven't won the white vote since 1964. And the only way they can keep power is to import minorities from places like Mexico, Central America, South America, with a tradition of big government. And they'll be grateful because a large percentage of them are going to be on public welfare, public assistance, whether it's medical assistance or getting free education K through 12 at somebody else's expense, or on welfare. And they'll be grateful to the Democratic Party for that. So that's what their goal is.
You know, Larry, within the country, I see a lot more Black Americans like yourself, intelligent Americans, really realizing that the Democratic Party is pulling the wool over their eyes for years. Mm-hmm. Do you see that changing within our citizens here?
Incrementally, yes, because if you look at Trump, I campaigned with him in 2016. Mm-hmm. We went to a black church in Cleveland, and he talked about school choice, and he talked about the importance of family, and he had them. And I said, this guy is not afraid to come into the inner city and speak from the heart. And he got 8% of the black vote. And that's up from 6% in 2012 when Obama ran for re-election. And what Trump said in 2016 is, what do you have to lose? He talked about the poor quality of schools. You know, in Baltimore, there are 13 urban public high schools in Baltimore where 0% of the kids can do math at grade level. Zero. And another half a dozen were 1%. So that's almost half of all the public high schools in Baltimore where either the kids are 0% or 1% math proficient. And then the crime is going up. And the crime going up because of these soft on crime DAs and because of this lie that the police are engaging in systemic racism that the Democrats have been pushing. And the people that are most hurt by the crime, of course, are black and brown people living in the inner city. So Donald Trump said, what do you have to lose? And he got 8% of the vote. And then he delivered the best economy ever for black Americans. He pardoned Jack Johnson, the first black heavyweight champion. He did real prison reform, so by the time he left office, there were 5,000 to 6,000 black men who had their prison sentences reduced an average of 70 months. He supported school choice, and he closed down the borders in a more secure way than we've seen in 30 or 40 years. The reason that's important is because most of the illegal aliens who come up here have high school or less, and therefore they're competing against people living in the inner city with high school or less. And they're putting downward pressure on their wages to the tune of almost $1,800 a year, according to a report from the Civil Rights Commission. So Donald Trump was a huge friend for black people. And in 2020, he got 12% of the black vote. That's a 50% increase. He got 20% of the male black vote. So It's going in the wrong direction, which is why the Democrats are doubling down on systemic racism and calling everything racist. Because when the demand for racism exceeds when the supply of racism exceeds the demand, they got to make up new crap, and that's what they're doing right now.
So you don't see this country at all as a racist country?
Are you kidding? Obama got a higher percentage of the white vote than John Kerry did 4 years earlier. There is any number of ways we could talk about this, but let me give you one stat. In 1940, this is before the Civil Rights Act, but before Brown versus Board of Education, 1940, 87% of black people lived below the federally defined level of poverty. 20 years later, 1960, that number had been reduced to 47%, a 40-point drop in 20 years. That's the greatest 20-year period of economic expansion in the history of black America. All this is before any of the civil rights legislation, before the war on poverty, before affirmative action, before set-asides, before all of these programs. Why? Families busting their butt, working hard, making economic progress. And after all these programs began, the economic growth of black people began to grow less steeply. So it hurt, if anything. So don't give me this crap. And the left loves to talk about poverty causing crime. Well, during the Great Depression, 25% of adults were unemployed. 50% of black adults were unemployed. You didn't have the same level of homicides that you're having right now, when by any measure we're more affluent than ever before. It's bull. There's a sociologist at Harvard named Orlando Patterson. He's black. He's from one of the islands, I think the Caribbean. And he's still there, tenured professor. And this in the early 90s, I think it was 1991 to be precise, he said America, with all its flaws, is the least racist majority white society in the world, provides more opportunities for blacks than any other country in the world, including all of those of Africa. That was in the early 90s. What are we talking about? There have been black CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. There have been I went to an Ivy League college, Brown University. There was a black female who became president of my college. There have been 2 black presidents of the American Bar Association, including a black female. There was a black president of the American Medical Association, a black governor of Virginia, for crying out loud, the capital of the Confederacy. What are we talking about? Congress is roughly, the House of Representatives is roughly 10% black, which is about the percentage of blacks in the population. And in the mid-60s, 1966 I think it was, MLK is giving a talk before British television. And Martin Luther King said, the last couple of years, the progress in America has surprised me. Civil Rights Act was passed in 64. It's now 2 years later. He said, the racial progress has surprised me. We could have a president in about 40 years' time. Almost on cue, Barack Obama becomes president. And he didn't say, we're going to have a black billionaire, and we've had several. He didn't say we're going to have a black CEO of a Fortune 500 company. There have been several. He said president. Why? Because that's the top.
That's the pinnacle.
That's it. Which means after that, put a fork in the idea you can't be who you want and what you want to be.
Right.
And now we're still going BMW on this stuff. Ketanji Brown Jackson. Oh my God, the first black female on the Supreme Court. Well, we could have had one years ago because for 2 years, Biden and the Democrats held up the nomination of Judge Janice Rogers Brown from California, where you and I are. She used to be a member of the California Supreme Court, was appointed by a Republican governor. But in California, you have to run for re-election. She got 76% of the vote, higher than any of the others who were running for their seat during that year. And this is in a conservative state called California. George W. Bush nominated her for the D.C. Court of Appeals, which is where Ketanji Brown Jackson sat before she became Supreme Court Justice. And for 2 years, Democrats filibustered her nomination. Ultimately, she got in, and Joe Biden goes on television. This is 2003, 2005. Goes on television and basically says, if George W. Bush has the gall to nominate her to the Supreme Court, we're going to filibuster her. Now, the same people that are extolling the progress of Ketanji Brown Jackson didn't say jack when Democrats were stopping Janice Rogers Brown. That's how phony they are. And more than that, though, Michael, again, after Obama became president, everything else is anticlimactic. Right. The first this, the first that. This is the first president.
First president.
Come on. She's the 3rd black person on the Supreme Court. Politico did a column about her, and it said, Ketanji Brown Jackson will be the first black member of the Supreme Court. Hello, Thurgood Marshall, Clarence Thomas still there. They had to change, they had to correct it.
Yeah.
These people are just too much.
I know. Well, we haven't had an Italian president yet, and I don't know if we'll have another. They'll call him a mobster if we do.
Although the first Italian member of the Supreme Court was Antonin Scalia.
Right.
And do you know how many Republicans and Democrats voted against him? None. Mm-hmm. Unanimous.
Yeah.
That's because at one time, unless your nominee was a child molester or a horse thief or a tax cheat, he or she got in. And then all of a sudden, the Democrats began to attack you based on judicial philosophy, and it started with Robert Bork, because he was going to change the ideological balance of the court. Then all of a sudden, the whole rules shifted, and now people are not voting against you because they don't like your judicial philosophy. They never did that in the history of the Supreme Court. And again, Antonin Scalia was probably the most conservative justice ever, and he was unanimously confirmed. So they changed the rules. And by the way, when Biden and the Democrats used the filibuster to stop Janice Rogers Brown, now all of a sudden Biden says the filibuster is a relic of Jim Crow because they're in power and they want to make sure their nominees go through. There's another guy they don't like talking about. His name is Miguel Estrada. Same thing, George W. Bush nominated him for the D.C. Court of Appeals, and they held his nomination up for 2 years and called him everything but a child of God. The stress was so severe, his wife had a miscarriage, and he withdrew his nomination. 2 years, hanging for 2 years. Withdrew the nomination. Couldn't get a job afterwards because, after all, he used to be a Solicitor General and was accused of authoring the torture memo that was used to justify trying to extract information after 9/11 from these bad guys. So he's a bad guy to the left. Couldn't get a job. His wife overdosed and died on prescription drugs accidentally. Now, if that happened on the other side, some Democrat nominee got held up and the wife had a miscarriage during the nomination process and later on OD'd on drugs, they'd be calling the Republicans murderers. But nobody says a word about this.
Larry, let me ask you this.
And by the way, one more quick thing. Miguel Estrada came to America, couldn't speak a word of English, from Honduras, was determined to be unanimously, eminently qualified by the American Bar Association, went to Harvard, and they held his nomination up. Based on what? Based on what? And now when Republicans made questions about Brown Jackson, they were accused of being racist.
Yeah, I saw that.
But when Democrats questioned Miguel Estrada and questioned Janice Rogers Brown, they're just conducting an inquiry about their judicial philosophy. They're just doing their jobs to advise and consent. That's how phony these people are.
Double standard. Ridiculous.
Double standard.
Let me ask you this. The issue that we're having over the border, bringing all these people in, the soft on crime police and politicians have said that they're putting in office now.
Right.
Do you think it's all just pandering to the minority vote, period?
Yeah.
Because what other reason could it be?
It's all to stay in power and to make sure that minority voters and guilty white liberals feel that that these guys over here, the Democrats, are wearing the white hat in the fight against tyranny and against racism and against institutional racism, covert racism, overt racism. They all come up with new terms. And these guys over here, these dastardly Republicans, are wearing the black hat. That's what they do, and that's how they get away with it. Look at my race when I ran for governor. I talked about the crime having gone up. I talked about homelessness out of control. I talked about the fact that 75% of third graders who are black in California government schools cannot read at state proficiency levels. And those levels are low. They lower them all the time so they can meet them. Half of all third graders cannot read at state levels of proficiency. I talked about the fact that people are leaving California for the very first time. I talked about the fact that Gavin Newsom ignored science and shut down the state while sitting up there at the French Laundry restaurant with the very people that drafted the mandates while his own kid was enjoying in-person private education while they were incurring a $12,000 wine tab. Now, I like an occasional glass of red wine. I know you do. I think you brought me a bottle of your new stuff. Can I
Yeah.
Notice the segue, Michael, huh?
Good segue.
Yeah, look at this.
And that's a special autograph bottle.
Right. So they're sitting up there at the French Laundry restaurant incurring a $12,000 wine tab. And
I wish it was my wine.
I assure you they were not drinking Mad Dog 2020.
Right.
And so that's what I talked about. And then in comes Obama, in comes Harris, Kamala Harris, in comes Bernie Sanders, in comes Elizabeth Warren, cutting commercials for him. Joe Biden flies in, and they all said the same thing, quote, "Stop the Republican takeover," close quote. Nobody said, you know, Gavin Newsom's doing a good job on crime, doing a good job on education, doing a good job on homelessness. They never said that. They just said, "Stop the Republican takeover." And I remember
that was the mandate.
That was but it works in California because we're outnumbered 3-1, and Republicans are perceived to be evil, and Donald Trump is hated. The only public figure more hated than Donald Trump in California is Charlie Manson, and he's dead. And it worked, and that's all they did. There was a Saturday Night Live skit about the Salem witches who were on trial, and the prosecutor stands up. He got a big sheet of papers this thick, and you think he's going to give a big long monologue. So he gets his papers, he goes through them, he points to one of the defendants, he goes, "Witch!" and sits down.
That was it.
That's what they did. Republican takeover! And they sat down, and it worked.
One thing, though, I mean, don't people understand that these soft-on-crime district attorneys and law enforcement people, don't they understand that they're destroying their own neighborhoods? I mean, the victims of this soft-on-crime are the minorities.
They are.
And why don't they realize that?
And the odd thing, too, is many people in the city do realize that. I saw a poll that said 81% of blacks want the police manpower to remain the same or be higher. So they're aware that they are disproportionately the victims of this crime and still pull the lever for the Democratic Party. That's the bizarre thing. The number one job of government is protect people and property, and they're not doing it. You're acknowledging it by saying you want the police manpower to remain the same or higher, yet you still pull that lever for these guys. Why? Why? Because they've convinced you that these guys over here are evil. Again, they think rich people don't pay their taxes when in fact they overpay taxes. They think rich people don't give any money to charity when in fact that they do. They think that the police are mowing down black people just because they're black. They're not. If anything, the studies show the cops are more hesitant, more reluctant to pull the trigger on a black suspect than a white suspect. I gave a talk once before a football team. I was invited by Urban Meyer, the then coach of the Ohio State Buckeyes, to talk to his football team. He brought in a Black Lives Matter guy the month before. Everybody was all upset about the cops. And my show was carried in Columbus and when I was with Salem. And he heard my show, and he asked me to come in and talk to his team. He said, "I'm not going to tell you whether I agree with you or disagree with you. I just want you to give a different perspective to my boys." So I came in, and I said, gave them all the stats, the studies, and for years the studies have shown the police are more hesitant, more reluctant to pull the trigger on a black suspect than a white suspect. And I said, the police kill more unarmed whites every year than they kill unarmed blacks. I had a microphone, and I said, "Name one unarmed white." I dropped the mic. I went like this. Nobody could think of anybody. Because the media doesn't give a damn.
Right.
And they only give a damn if an unarmed black person has been killed if it's a white cop doing the killing. There was a study done by Police Magazine. They did a poll. And they asked people who self-described as very liberal, how many unarmed black men the police kill any given year. And half of the self-described very liberal people, Michael, said the police kill 1,000. Around 8% said the police kill 10,000. Then they asked people who self-describe as just regular liberal, how many unarmed black men do the police kill every year? And 39% of them said 1,000. Around 7 or 8% of them said 10,000. The number that year, according to the Washington Post database, was 12. 12. So if you believe that the police kill 10,000 unarmed black men every day, and the Democrats are the ones doing something about it, I pull the lever for the Democratic Party too. That's how deluded these people are, because they're in their silos. They're watching CNN, they're watching MSNBC, they're reading the New York Times, they're not reading other sources, and as a result, they're just ignorant about what the facts are. And the more ignorant you are, the easier it is for you to be led around the nose, easier it is for you to be deluded.
Larry, I could talk to you for the next 4 hours because you're educating me. I mean, but honestly, as I sit here and listen, we agree on everything. I mean, what's the fix? If we had to say, you and I can go out and fix this somehow, what would we do?
The fix is the truth, and to be unafraid to say it, and unafraid to go where it needs to be said. I can't tell you how many times people have said to me, "Well, Larry, you can say this because you're black." No, you can say it because it's true. Malcolm X said, "I'm for the truth no matter who's telling it." And when a white person is falsely accused of being racist, many of my white friends just go feel. They don't fight back. They don't say you're not telling the truth. They don't want to deal with the confrontation. And as long as you're rolling over like that and playing dead, we're going to have these problems. Stand up and tell the truth. Eventually the truth wins.
Would you think of running again for governor?
Not for governor, because in 2003, when the first time we had a successful recall That was Arnold Schwarzenegger recalling Gray Davis. Between then and now, Michael, the electoral battlefield in California is so different. Now there are 5% more registered Democrats. There are 50% more registered independents. And independents in California vote Democrat, according to the New York Times. Not according to me, New York Times said that. There were 33% fewer registered Republicans. And still, I got 49% of the replacement vote, about the same percentage that Arnold Schwarzenegger did. We haven't had a Republican win in California statewide for any office in 20 years. So the math is daunting. The only reason I did the recall is because if the ball carried the right way, I could have gotten in with as little as 25% of the total votes cast, assuming 50% plus one voted to recall this man. That's why I decided to do it in a recall election. But one-on-one, it's almost impossible to win. But I've not closed the door for another race, higher office down the road. What's higher than governor of California? Ain't much left.
That's right. Well, you're well qualified.
Thank you.
That's for sure.
I appreciate it.
And I would support you undyingly.
I appreciate that.
And you've been terrific. Candace Owens.
I gotta brag on her for a while. She is my girl. And she has told me that I inspired her to stop being a brain-dead liberal and to start thinking about her views.
Really?
Yes, I think she even used the word mentor. And while we're bragging on Larry Elder again, I've got a coaching tree. Candace Owens has credited me with opening her eyes. Ben Shapiro has credited me with inspiring him to get into the business of talk radio and conservative commentary. Andrew Breitbart has publicly credited me with getting him into criticizing the left-wing media and to getting into this kind of commentary. The editor-in-chief of Breitbart is named Alex Marlowe. I gave him his first job in the conservative world. He was an intern for one of my books, my second book. Stephen Miller, one of Donald Trump's top guys. I first put him on radio when he was 14 years old. He was a student at Santa Monica High School. And he was complaining that his high school was not doing the Pledge of Allegiance, which is required by our state laws. Most high schools were ignoring it. His was no different. So he went to the administration and said, we're supposed to be doing the Pledge of Allegiance. And they refused. They came on my show and complained about it. And he was so bright. I had him on my show for years. He was the most frequent guest I had on my radio show. And he was on 69 times. The reason I know that is because he counted them. And we followed him from the time he graduated from Santa Monica High. He went to Duke. He was involved in criticizing the coverage of the Duke lacrosse scandal. Those boys were innocent. He knew it right away they were. And then he went to Washington, D.C., began working for Jeff Sessions. He worked up to be a top aide to Jeff Sessions. Sessions loaned him to Donald Trump and never got him back. There's a cartoonist named Tony Branco. He's syndicated. And I used to like his work so much, I went to my syndicator and I said, this guy's good. And they said, well, you don't think he's that good? I said, yes, he is. No, he's not. So over the course of the next couple of years, I would find a particularly good cartoon that Tony did, and I would show it to these guys. And ultimately they said, Uncle. And they brought him in, and now he's a syndicated a political cartoonist for Creative Syndicate, and I helped him get that gig. So I've got a lot of people that I've influenced, and I'm very proud of that. Michelle Malkin's one more. Michelle Malkin. I was the first one to put her on TV or radio. She was a reporter with the Daily News, the Valley newspaper, and I invited her on my radio show, and she'd never been on TV or radio before. So I've got my fingerprints on a lot of people, a lot of young people that have gone on to do big things, and so I'm really proud of that.
Well, I hope you can continue. And I tell you this, Larry, your command of the facts are amazing. I'm so impressed. I mean, you don't go into all of this all the time on your radio show, but we got to, we had a chance to really flush some things out.
And Michael, I couldn't tell you what I had last night for dinner, and I couldn't tell you what restaurant it was. But for stuff I care about, I remember.
Well, you know what? I hope you continue. I mean it, because we need people like you. We need you in some office here that really makes a difference.
I appreciate that.
And we need your voice. So I know you're not in radio anymore. Is that correct?
No, I'm doing videos for Epic Times.
Right.
You can go on YouTube and look at some of them. And I may start a podcast, not sure about that. And I'm doing my political action committee, as I mentioned, Elder for America, to campaign for school choice, get rid of this critical race theory stuff, get rid of these soft on crime DAs, and promote policies to strengthen families. So elderforamerica.com. Throw something in the tip jar.
Well, listen, I appreciate it because, like I said, you're one of the voices that turned me from, Democrat to Republican or independent, whatever it might be. But you opened my eyes.
I appreciate
you and Rush, and I appreciate that. And I'll support you and just keep up the great work.
God
I
bless.
really mean that.
God bless
you.
God bless you.
Well, that's it. This was very special to me because I've been listening to Larry for a long time, and to be able to sit with him, and he had such command of the facts. I mean, it's amazing. I'm just sitting here, and I let him talk because he had so much to say, and it was really brilliant and very, very eye-opening. So I hope you appreciate that. And I guess that's it. So how do I always leave you? Same way. Be safe. And I really mean that. Ladies, when you go outside, you're in the parking lot, please look around. A lot of things happening that is scary. I have 5 daughters and a wife, and I really try to open their eyes to that. Look at your surroundings. Be healthy. Coming out of a pandemic, get into the gym, eat right, do the right things. Very important. And I mean this from the heart because I care about all of you that are supporting me. God bless you, and I do mean that. And yes, I'll see you next time. Take care.